A guten Erev Shabbos. A man has a terrible fear of things under the bed. He can barely get to sleep at night, and he can't sleep well at all once he does. Finally, goes to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist tells him, I think that in a year of analysis, we can get to the bottom of this problem. Man wants to know, what's it going to cost? Psychiatrist tells him, well, it's $200 a visit, and I think I'll need to see you 3 times a week. Man says, okay, let me think about it, and I'll get back to you. Nothing. 6 months later, the psychiatrist is walking down the street, and he happens to see the man. So he says, what happened? I thought you'd come and see me, and we'd get to the bottom of those fears you were having about things hiding under your bed. How are you managing? So the man says, well, I started thinking $600 a week for a year. It's a lot of money. I was thinking about what to do when, you know what happened? A bartender cured me for $10. Psychiatrist is a little bit skeptical, so he says, how, may I ask, did this bartender cure you? The man said, I told him I was worried I couldn't sleep because of things hiding under the bed. Bartender says, cut the legs off the bed. Nothing hiding under there now. I sleep like a baby. It's been said quite famously that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nelson Mandela said, the brave man is not he who does not feel fear, but he who conquers that fear. Louisa May Alcott said, I'm not afraid of storms because I'm learning how to sail my ship. These quotes are inspiring, and the story suggests that sometimes it's simpler than we think to overcome our anxieties. And yet, fear, anxiety, and mental health are some of the greatest challenges of our times, even as we make great strides in other areas of healthcare. What is it about fear and anxiety that's so all-pervasive, so consuming? This week's Parsha of Vayishlach addresses this part of life head-on. You'll recall 2 weeks ago, Esav sold his birthright to Yaakov for a pot of lentils, and Yaakov came to their father dressed as Esav to receive the blessing. Esav was outraged and he vowed revenge. In the meantime, in the interim, Yaakov married first Leah, then Rachel, and between them and their servant girls in last week's Parsha, birthed 11 out of 12 of the Shvatim, the heads of the tribes, soon to be designated as the children of Israel. Yaakov was also very successful in shepherding, and he accumulated great wealth. But his fear and anxiety about encountering his brother never left him. Ramban, Nachmanides, explains that Yaakov was afraid, as this week's Parsha opens, because he had to pass through the land of Edom, and that's the land where Esav and his family lived. Now we might think that his fear is misplaced. Wasn't it true that God promised him, I will preserve you wherever you go, I will bring you back to this land? So what could Yaakov possibly be afraid of? One view from the Gemara in Brachas is that Yaakov was afraid that he might have done something that made him no longer worthy, no longer meritorious of God's protection. The commentators find numerous ways to interpret this. That's their job, right? Ibn Ezra suggests that Yaakov thought the promise might have protected him, but not necessarily his children, his wives, his household. Ramban says, no, can't be like that. Yaakov's children's well-being could not have been in jeopardy, because then God's promise could not be fulfilled. He notes that the messengers that Yaakov sent as an advance party came back with a report that Esav was still mad. He notes that the Torah doesn't say that they reported any conversation between themselves and Esav, which leads the Ramban to conclude that Esav didn't even receive them civilly. He didn't so much as speak to the messengers that Yaakov sent. If there would have been an exchange, they would have told Yaakov exactly what transpired. Rashbam, Rabbi Shmuel ben Meir, who's a grandson of Rashi, thought the opposite. They reported that Esav was coming to meet him with his 400 men, and this was a sign of respect. Yaakov's fear got the best of him, though, and he fled across the river. Rashbam's contemporary, Chizkiah ben Manoach, explains that Yaakov didn't know if Esav's coming towards him was for the good or not. If he fled, it would make Esav angry. If he stayed, it could be dangerous. The Or HaChaim HaKadosh explains that Yaakov prepared for both possibilities. He divided his retinue into 2 camps, one prepared for peace and one prepared for battle. Baal Shem Tov has an interesting angle on all this, based on a verse we know very well from Psalm 23, Ach tov v'chesed, yirdefuni kol yemei chayai. Surely goodness and kindness will follow me all the days of my life. David HaMelech, King David, is asking here that if it happens that out of ignorance, not knowing what's coming, if he runs away from goodness and mercy, that it should pursue him nonetheless and catch up with him. This is what happened with Yaakov. Yaakov's fear was what leads people to avoid situations that might be sent specifically to benefit them, to help them learn about themselves, how to sail their own ship, in Alcott's phrase that we mentioned before. Much of this parsha finds Yaakov Avinu, Jacob, our ancestor, in what you call a liminal state, meaning he's on a boundary, a threshold, between two places, neither here nor there. He's before an encounter with someone who once said he wanted to kill him, but he's not there yet. He's on one side of a river. Others dear to him are on the other side of the river. It's very anxiety-provoking, very unsettling. If you're home, you're comfortable, you're in familiar surroundings, you know more or less where things are and what to expect, more or less. When you go on holiday, you stay at a hotel, you bring some of your things with you, and you make the place your own a little bit. You set it up the way you like it. But the state in between is out of kilter, and that is certainly where Yaakov is. As a forerunner, a progenitor of the Jewish people, our experience mirrors his. We have been wanderers for many centuries without a secure home, a place to hang our hat, and put our feet up and be comfortable. Thankfully, for the last 75 years, Israel has welcomed us home, but even that needs to be defended and watched and worried about. Those who wish us ill make sure that we don't sleep very well at night. If our process of becoming who we are and becoming settled reflects Yaakov's, then a certain degree of anxiety, unsettledness, even fear might be understandable. Because this state of being is itself a tension between two frames of mind. On the one hand, we appreciate that a certain amount of humility is called for. We're part of something larger than ourselves. The endurance of the Jewish people, Israel, called by Yaakov's name, that is beyond human comprehension, and has certainly fouled up the attempts of some historians to make grand conclusions about the rises and falls of various nations. As long as we stay connected to our source of life, to Hashem, part of us remains eternal. But that takes dedication and humility, and even setting aside our individual agendas and desires from time to time. At the same time, each of us has our unique and distinct contribution to make to the journey of the Jewish people and even the development of the world. So we have to discover our individual talents and skills and use them to the best benefit. How can we possibly do both? Isn't that too tall an order, too much to ask of any person, even a whole nation, to be both humble and self-assured? Not when you're the Jewish people or a Jewish person, because we carry two names. Yaakov's two names, in fact, Yaakov and Yisrael. The second name acquired as a blessing in this week's Parsha, when he wrestles with the angel of Esav, or the man, or his worst fears, or whatever that apparition is that grapples with him all night until sunrise. At that point, the Torah tells him and us that his name shall no longer be called Yaakov, which means the one who supplants or gains through cunning or holds on to the heel, but rather his name from now on will be called Yisrael, Israel. Ki sarisa im Elokim v'anashim v'tuchal, the verse says, because you have wrestled with God and with man, and you have prevailed. That's the side of confidence and trust and certainty that we're doing all we are able. And yet he is still sometimes called Yaakov for all the reasons we mentioned. And we are also called both. We are called Beis Yaakov, Beth Jacob, the house of Jacob, because we are. And we're also Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, the Israelites, who wrestle with God and with humankind and prevail, because we do. It's not in running away from our fears or trying to avoid them or wish them away, but rather in confronting them with humility and confidence and faith and trust that we prevail. The unknown and the liminal is what is scary. It's unsettling and worrisome not to know where you're going next, how to get there, or even what will happen when you get there. It brings about a certain disequilibrium. And yet, with all of God's blessings, like Shuv la'artzecha u'lemladcha ve'etiva imach, return to your land and to your relatives, and I will do good with you, as Yaakov quotes God at the beginning of our portion. We have got this far, and we have endured the worst that God and humankind could throw at us. But we are still here. We hold on to these two names of Beis Yaakov, the house of Jacob, and Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, because we realize by now, hopefully, that these two names give us both the humility to know that some things are beyond our control. So they instill a certain fear or anxiety, and yet we face them, and at the same time the strength and fortitude to overcome them, to grapple with God and with humanity, and to prevail. For the time being, it's not possible to know everything that's coming, nor to be able to control it all. At the same time, we know we have what it takes to prevail, to transform night into day, darkness into light, the opposite of good into good. Good Shabbos.